Okay, so this tutorial we're going to talk about how to use Photoshop to make a perspective collage. So we're going to do something like the image you see here, and I'll kind of walk you through a couple of the techniques um, for setting this type of image up. So the first thing I'll do is I'll make a new document, file new. I'm going to select print, go to tabloid that's 11 by 17 inches, and set my orientation to um, landscape. Okay, and then I have a bunch of images saved, and the first thing I want to show you is how to like crop image. So I'm going to start with this image here, and you can just drag things in, or you can go to File, or perhaps Edit, and Place. Sorry, right there, Place Embedded or Place Linked. Okay, so what we're going to do for the most part is we're just going to drag stuff in. And what that actually does is it places it in a way where it is like this option. It's called linked. And you'll notice that in the layers panel on the layer for the image I just placed, there's a little like icon, and if I hover over it, it says Smart Object Thumbnail. So all that means is it's right now like linked to an external file, much like it would be in InDesign. And I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. But I can always right-click on the layer and just go to rasterize layer, and then it'll no longer have that icon. For some things you'll want to rasterize, and other things it won't matter. Just leave it as is. So first thing is just cropping out the part of this image that I want to keep. So up here on the left-hand side where the tools are, I'll select the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just going to trace the outline of this tool. There we go. So now I've created a selection. You see the little marching ants outline. And in order to make a mask, so I'm going to crop all my images by using transparency masks. And to make a transparency mask, you click this little button down here where it says Add Layer Mask, a little rectangle with a circle in the center. And you can see what that does is it crops away the stuff that's outside of my selection. It also adds another layer next to my original layer, and that's the transparency mask itself. And as we may have discussed before, basically everything on this layer is either black or white. Well, is grayscale of some kind. And so black is obviously not visible, white is totally visible, and gray is everything in between. So what's great about cropping things this way is you can always come back and edit them, and I'll do that a couple different times throughout this video. Okay, so if I want to place a couple more objects, one of the things I wanted to point out is when you're searching for images that you may not have that you want to include in your illustration, if you go to Google Images and you go to search, or sorry, go to Images and go to Tools, and down here where it says Size, one thing that you need to be aware of is the is the resolution of the images that you're placing in your file. Because you don't want different elements to have different resolutions, excuse me, and then for them to kind of not look consistent. Excuse me 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to take this image here, and I'll just save it. So also, by the way, when you search for images in Google anyway, you can see the resolution of the image right there. And if we wanted to, we could go to Photoshop File, and go to Image, and go to Image Size right here. And if we change this into pixels, it'll show us that we have our canvas is about 5,000 by 3,000. And I mean, the easiest way really to tell how big this image is going to be is just by placing it in our file. So you can see right there, that image is probably a little too small for what we want to use it for. Yeah, so that's just to say you want to be mindful of the size of the image that you pull in. Okay, so I'm going to use an image that I already have selected. This one right here. See, it has pretty high resolution. And so when you place it, like when you place a linked object, it's going to like show up like this with a little X through it. So we got to kind of position it where we want and then press enter on the keyboard. So now it's like placed and you can see it's a smart object. It's got that little icon. So what I want to do is I'm gonna resize it first before I crop it, because when you crop something, it won't select anything that's outside of the bounds of the canvas. So in other words, right now, part of my image is off the bottom of the page. If I cropped it right now, it wouldn't actually crop that stuff. So I'm going to resize it first. I can do that one of two ways. I can hit Control T on the keyboard to go into transform. You can also go to the marquee tool and right-click with the current image, current layer selected, and go to free transform, and that's the same thing. And so just like with anything else, if I hold Shift, I constrain the proportions. If I hold Alt, I scale it around the center. Okay, and then I can just drag it as well by clicking. You can also rotate it if you want to, and then press Enter when I'm done. And so to select, to crop this guy, oh, I should also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but when you Google search for an image, also if you add the words cutout, sometimes you can find images that already have a already have a white background or come as a PNG, and that'll make it a lot easier to crop things. Okay, so over here where the magic wand tool is, if I click and hold on that button, there's two tools underneath that button. There's the magic wand tool and there's the quick selection tool. So for this, I'm going to use the quick selection tool because it's going to make things a lot easier. So the quick selection tool works just like the paintbrush. So we can change the size of it if we hold Alt on the keyboard and right click. So I'm dragging to the left and to the right to change the size of it. And like with the brush, if I hold right click and drag up and down, I can change like how hard the edge is. I'm going to go relatively hard, small brush here. And then as I click and drag around, you'll see that the quick selection tool will kind of automatically select areas that are similar. And then when I let go, you'll see it'll also refine the edge of my selection. And right now I'm just clicking and dragging. But let's say, for example, I click down here and I don't actually want that in my image. I can hold Alt and you'll see my little icon change to a minus. And then when I click and drag, I deselect rather than select. And then if I wanted to highlight this, the pole of the umbrella, alter my selection tool to be a little smaller. And you'll see because it's white, it's going to be a lot more difficult to actually select. So what I might actually do is just not select it that way. Just going to leave that out for right now. So now, again, I have the marching ant outline of what I want to crop. And up here at the top, as long as I still have that tool selected, I'll see a button that says Select and Mask. I'm going to click on that button. And you'll see right now it's like taken me into this other intermediate step where I can adjust my selection. So if I drag the smooth button up, it's a little hard to tell what's going on with this one. But if I drag the smooth button up, it'll like smooth out the edges. If I drag feather, you can see it'll make the edges kind of fade into opaque more than like have a hard edge. Contrast kind of does a similar thing, except it makes the edge harder. And then also we can like expand or diminish the outline using the Shift Edge button. Most of the time, like right now, I can pretty much just leave everything as is. I'm going to turn the feather down again, and then I'll go ahead and click. So again, we'll return to our image and we'll see the marching ant outline. But this time, it's actually adjusted. It's applied those adjustments that we just made to our selection. And so now when I go ahead and make my transparency mask, it'll look like what the preview looked like before. And what I want to do to add this pole in is I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, and I'm just going to paint on my transparency mask. So you hold Alt on the keyboard and click on the transparency mask, then you can actually see what it looks like. You kind of enter into the transparency mask. You hold Shift, click on it, then it'll temporarily disable it. And that's what I want to do, so that way I can see what I'm doing. So I'll switch over to the paintbrush tool, and just like with the selection tool, I right-click, hold Alt and right-click to resize it. And because I want the pool to become visible, I'm going to set my paintbrush to white. So I'll set my swatch to white. Make sure that I have the layer mask selected and not the layer. See that little brackets around the corners. Sorry. And then in here. And so in order to paint this white, because it's a straight line, I'll just click at this end. So I just clicked one time. Oops. I'll hold Shift and I'll click down here. And then if I go into my transparency mask, you can see I've drawn a pretty straight line. Let's clean up whatever this is. Okay. And there we go. So now I've brought the whole of the umbrella back as well. Okay, so I'll go ahead and push that over here for the moment. The other thing I wanted to talk about, so most of these objects that I brought in, like the diving board, I did in exactly the same way. In fact, sometimes it can be even faster if you have a really nicely cropped image like this, and all I really want is to keep, is to remove the background. I'll go to, rather than use the quick select, I'll use the magic wand, and then I'll select the white background. And you can see, as long as I have my contiguous button turned off, it'll select everything that's the same color. So it'll select all the white background, even the stuff that's like enclosed in other outlines. And we can also adjust like how much. So you can see right here, the top of my handrail kind of turned, got deselected because it's too light. I can also adjust the tolerance to make that slightly less so, but you'll see that your edge will start to get messed up when you do that. So, and that on 15. Okay, and then this time, so now I'll take my selection and I'll click the add layer mask, and you'll see what it's actually done is it's cropped out the stuff that I wanted to keep. And so all I need to do is go onto my layer mask, it's already selected, and go to Image, Adjustments, and click Invert. And so now everything that was white on my layer mask turns black and vice versa. And so it's made my diving board visible. The other thing I did for my diving board, because it's blue and I wanted it to stand out from the pool background, is I added an adjustment layer. So down here next to the layer mask, I clicked the little circle with the black and white in it. And these are all your adjustments. I highly recommend you make adjustment layers rather than apply them directly to individual layers, because when you apply them directly, you can't undo that. Or at least once you get a certain way down the road, you can't undo it. So if I click on this one, Hue and Saturation, I have a couple options that appear in my Properties panel. And one of them is I can adjust the hue of everything in my image, and I can adjust how colored it is. Also adjust lightness. Click on Do to reset it. So just like with any other layer, adjustment layers affect everything that's like downstream from them, everything that's below them. But in my case, I just want to affect the diving board. So I'll hold Alt on the keyboard, and you'll see that when I hover my mouse between the two layers, there's a little icon that shows up. And when I click right there, you can see the little arrow shows up there. Now any adjustment that I make only gets applied to that layer that the adjustment applied to. Okay. Got a little bit brighter there. Okay. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show. So I'll do the cropping on this guy as well. Oops. Right. So just go ahead and place it, press enter. So I need to drag this up above that Hue and Saturation layer, and then I needed to relink it. So I had, because of what layer I had selected, it just came in underneath that. But anyway, so I just needed to reorder my layers. So I'll adjust the size of this guy. Just like before, I'm going to use, for this one, I'm going to use the quick select tool. Okay. And so you can see that just by like adjusting kind of your brush, and this image is actually really pretty easy to select because there's high contrast between the guy and the background. Just in red. Okay. That looks pretty good. And now I can go to select and mask, and it'll give me a sense of what that'll look like when I crop with it. And I could, for example, here, if I wanted to drag this down, crop out a little bit of that blue background that's still showing up. Click OK, and then apply the mask. Somehow I messed up right here. I'll just go to the paintbrush tool, and I'll switch over to white. Oops. Clean that up. Okay, there we go. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was kind of filters. So I have this other, I'm just going to steal it from here. One useful trick is if you want to select a certain layer and you don't know what it's called or what order it is in your layers panel, you can right click on the actual object and you'll see that I have the option to select that layer, and that was the thing I wanted. So right there. Right there, for example, I selected that staircase. Select. Actually want to select this. Drag it from one file into the other. So that was like a staircase. This is a pretty low res image, so hopefully you guys will have a better one. But a couple of things I wanted to show with this example. First of all, like up here, especially because my image is so low resolution, the kind of blue sky background that's showing between the bars of the handrail is really, really hard to crop. So I cropped most of the there as much as I thought I needed to. But the other thing I did in order to clean that up without having to go in and painstakingly crop everything is I just used a black and white adjustment layer. And like before, I'll hold Alt just to apply it to that one layer. And with black and white, we can change actually what each color becomes. If I mess with the blue adjustments, I can kind of get my railing to look like it should. I'll make the background look kind of lighter than the railing itself. Okay, so, and then the other thing I wanted to show with this was using filters to kind of make it, to give it another graphic quality. So if I go to filter, filter gallery, and remember I have the layer itself selected, not the layer mask. Filter gallery. And then in here we have a whole lot of different options for how we can kind of adjust the graphic quality of this guy. So if you go to sketch, for example, halftone kind of makes it look like a newspaper print, and stamp will kind of make it look like outlines. I think that was what had been done. However, it would work better with a higher quality image, higher resolution. But yeah, there's a whole series of them in here. Go through and figure out which one. Like, I'll just do like half. There we go. So now it looks kind of like we've given it another graphic quality to add like a layer of difference to our image. Okay, and then I suppose the only other thing I wanted to mention was like when you're adjusting, good example, here. So if we wanted to include like signage, for example, and I'm just going to hit escape. So if I wanted to bring that in on top of this layer, I can select that layer and drag it in. There we go. Now I'll press enter. So I'll kind of resize that. So let's say we wanted to put this kind of near the shallow end of the pool to show that signage. But if we wanted to adjust this, for example, to kind of fit with the perspective a little bit better, one thing we can do is we can use, go to free transform. So I can go to the marquee tool, right click and go to free transform. And once I'm inside of the free transform tool, I can right click again. And then I have a whole bunch of different options for specific types of transform. So I'm going to use distort because it's kind of the most flexible, even though perspective can do the same thing. Now you can see I can drag the corners around however I like. So for example, if I wanted to make it look like it was on, like on this stair somewhere. See those little smart track lines showing up? We can zoom in to avoid those from setting up our snaps. Okay, there we go. So now I can press enter and it's kind of taken on that distortion. The other thing that you may want is to use a layer effect. So down here on the other side of the transparency mask, there's this little FX symbol. And if I click on it, there's a few different options here you'll probably be familiar with, like the drop shadow and the glow. So if I just go to the stroke one, I can add like an outline to an image. If I want to, for example, if I wanted the sign to have a clear outline relative to the background, I could do that. Color here. Okay, and whenever you do that, you'll see that something has been added to your layer where it says effects. And so you can double click on that. You can always adjust it. Something else. Okay, well, I think those are all the kind of basic tools that you'll need for this assignment, for this type of illustration. And what I would recommend, again, is with Photoshop, always save a Photoshop file. So when you're done, go to File, Save As, and save it as a .psd. I'll call this my save it as a .psd. And then I'll also save it as a JPEG. I actually would recommend not saving it to a PDF from Photoshop because PDF, so you could save it to a PDF. PDF will preserve the layers. The problem with that is in Photoshop, even though it's good because it preserves the like editability of the image, it'll slow down whatever file you're placing it into because it doesn't like automatically flatten it the way a JPEG does. So I would recommend you save a PSD and a JPEG. And then the JPEG is what you would use to place inside your document or your InDesign document. And let's see, so yeah, my PSD file is about 54 megabytes, which is pretty big, and my JPEG is about 1.5 megabytes. So when I place it in the InDesign file, it'll run better, it'll preview faster, and it'll make a smaller PDF as well when I export from InDesign. And then if I ever wanted to adjust this, I would just come back into the PSD, make my adjustments, save it out as a JPEG, and then update the link. Okay, so that should be the end of this tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and sign off.